Well, if we look at the year 2004 election, really have to go back a little to the year 2000. And I think it was a complete surprise to the KMT then that Chen Shui-bian managed to win the election just 2.6% ahead of James Song. And of course, Chen Shui-bian would have never had that opportunity to begin with if the KMT had not split itself internally between the kind of Taiwanized KMT, which was the mainstream, Li Denghui and his successor Lian Zhan, and then the group that wanted to keep with the pure China perspective that is headed by Song. Now, it's really hard when we look at KMT politics to know if this is just personal rivalries or if there is really a political position in it. But, well, it seemed there was a political position. But it's really amazing the way the Lian Zhan position collapsed. And supposedly in those last days, a lot of KMT people had to make a decision as to whether they would vote for Song or whether they would vote for Chen. And so a large number of them came down saying, no, we are not going to, even the KMT people would not vote for Song, a mainlander who was so much involved himself in the White Terror regime because he was government information officer in the period of the Meili Dao incident crackdown.
Could you discuss the relationship between Li, Lian, and Song, and like?
Oh yeah, I could.
Because there's, you know, like did Li manipulate the election by splitting them up, or did they split up on their own, or was it both, or you know?
Yeah, see, this is the crucial issue as to why the KMT split, and it's a little hard to interpret this, but I have my own interpretation, and I've also tried to get information from people who have worked a long time with Li Denghui. And I think Li Denghui himself had a rather clear direction over the long run, that he was acting as an obedient functionary within the KMT, but still trying to consolidate Taiwanese power. But it took him a long time to do that. And he was really, at the beginning of his first presidency, really just a figurehead. This is what a lot of people will tell you, which he will even say, from $1 trillion in debt. So, I mean, that was really a tremendous amount of slush. Everyone knew that any local leader who, local neighborhood head who asked for 100,000 NT would be given 200,000 instead of, you know, double what he asked for, including some people who were DPP. So moving into that election of the year 2000, you would say that Song actually had a pretty good base, even in a lot of local Taiwan society, and yeah, he came very close. I mean, there was just a 2.6% split between Chen Shui-bian and Song, but Lian's position collapsed. Now, if you want the details, I think I see why Lian's position collapsed, and I was able to talk to Huang Yuzhen, I believe the name was, who was his campaign manager, who was very close to Li Denghui. And I think at the beginning of the campaign that Lian looked as though he was obediently following the Li Denghui line. That is, you might say, gradual Taiwanization of the KMT. But when Song came out with his challenge from a Chinese nationalism position, I think Lian began to show his true colors. And his true colors really was that he believed that the Chinese mentality, the mentality of Chinese nationalism, was still strongest in Taiwan. And therefore he began to look more and more like Song, to compete with Song on this spectrum of Chinese nationalism. And that's when his own people, who were really followers of Li Denghui, became more and more reluctant to support Lian. And as I say, I have it from one of his campaign managers that that he disagreed with Lian's direction at that point. So I think it was when Lian began to show his true colors that he, rather than thinking, well, this Chinese nationalism is just marginalized in Taiwan, and he should go with Taiwan nationalism or Taiwan identity, No, he moved more towards sounding just like Song. But of course, the people who were going to vote for Song were not going to vote for Lian. So really, in that election, the election polarized between, Chen Shui-bian, the Taiwan, and Song, the old Chinese nationalist KMT position. And that's where this surprising split came about, even though the KMT with Lian still had the machine. It's quite amazing.
So is it true that was Song offered the vice presidential position?
You mean before the year 2000?
In 2000, before he chose to run on his own, was he offered the
That
vice
I don't
president?
know. That I don't know. I don't think at that point he was willing to accept the vice presidential position, because I think there was enough of a polarization developing between the Chinese nationalism and the Taiwan identity, these two positions within the KMT itself. I mean, a large group of about 13 legislators had already split off from the KMT, basically on the issue of whether the KMT should Taiwanize. They were the more Taiwan faction and most of them ended up at the DPP. So you see this kind of fracturing. I guess you could see this as a fracturing process of the old Chinese mentality of the KMT, even within the KMT.
Would you like to comment on there's talk that Li Donghui was secretly supporting Chen before the election while supporting Lian in public, and that My information on that is that that Li Donghui really expected his man Lian to win, but that Lian would follow his path, and so he was mistaken in this. I think that if Li Donghui really had such a position, he would have made some overtures to the DPP much earlier. Now, I think that Li probably over many years, actually from 1990, I think 1990, when there was the student movement and the professors' movement demanding reform of the system in Taiwan, that at that time he was rooting for some kind of a shock to the KMT control. And especially with this popular uprising, which was not specifically DPP at that time, he was able to actually get the KMT to pass popular election of the president. So this was quite crucial. In 1997, he had another phase of cooperation with the DPP. But let's say this from the position of being, in the DPP at that time, I can say that in DPP dealings with the KMT and with Li Donghui, it seemed that they would agree to some reform. They'd agree to it at some big meeting to look good, but within 2 months they would have a backlash against it from their more conservative side, and they would double-cross the DPP. So I'd say in almost all the agreements between the KMT and the DPP, or some faction of the KMT, the Li Donghui people, and the DPP through 1997 or so, it was generally a very hypocritical thing, that the KMT would agree to a reform, but then within 2 months, they would begin reinterpreting and denying it, and then would welch on the deal. And so it seemed like the DPP was always making concessions to a rather insincere reformer with Li Donghui, or with the KMT as a whole. So I don't think, let's say my information from Li Donghui's lieutenants was that no, he expected that Lian Zan would win. And I think it wasn't probably until late in the election when Lian Zan changed his tone somewhat, or the middle of the election, Lian Zan changed his tone, and the Li Donghui line people began deserting him, that this, you might say, the Lian Zan collapse came up. Well, I think one thing that's rather amusing is that even if Li Donghui did not intend for Chen Shui-bian to be elected, I think after he was hounded after he was hounded out of the KMT in such an ugly fashion, I think he was happy or satisfied that Chen Shui-bian was elected. And the best evidence I can say for that is that at the inauguration ceremony, that's May 20th, the year 2000, a huge occasion for the DPP, the first president, the first time that the KMT had ever had a real election and lost the presidency. Almost no KMT officials showed up for that inauguration or for the ceremony of handing over the symbols of office. And I remember seeing the video, though, of Li Denghui at least appearing to hand over the symbols of office. And he looked like he was trying to keep a really straight, serious, unhappy face, but he would just keep breaking out into a little smile at the edge and then like catching himself and stopping himself, looking like it was tragedy, right, for the KMT to lose. But he just looked delighted, as though he was secretly delighted. And I think if you got that film, you'd have no way to deny that he was very happy to be handing over the reins of office to a Taiwanese, Chen Shui-bian.
And you think he felt that way because he was ugly, thrown out of the game, or forced out?
Not just because he was forced out, no, because I think his age he's far enough along. I mean, he was already 70 then, right? Or 70, almost 80. I think because he didn't want the situation to go back to the old days. He didn't want it to drift back towards Chinese nationalism under Song. I mean, really, the contest finally came down to Chen and Song. That is, you might say over a long period in the KMT, there had been a monolithic image, a monolithic loyalty to Chinese nationalism, but that had gradually been eroded by, the long-term separation from China and, just the practical international realities, and by the fact that more and more of the KMT was Taiwanese and depended on the Taiwan economy. I mean, a lot of this is driven by Taiwan businessmen, especially after elections were really in operation from 1993 on. So I think he didn't want the polity to drift back towards Chinese nationalism. That's my view on this. And if we look at it, looks even more that way if we look at his further development.
I heard that he released the actual polls to the DPP, saying that Chen would win by a small margin, and released phony polls to the KMT side saying that Lian would win.
Yeah.
To promote this split so that people would vote for Lian instead of Song.
Would vote for Song instead of Lian, you mean?
No, to vote.
To vote for whom?
The poll said the KMT would win, Lian would win.
When Lian would win.
And that's interpreted.
So is this to give a false confidence? To give a false confidence to the KMT, or what?
Yeah, so that people would vote for Lian instead of Song, thereby giving Chen a better chance of winning.
I think that I wouldn't quite believe those things. I wouldn't really believe that, because that assumes that the president had the capacity to manipulate things in such detail and that he could know the vote before it happened. And I don't think anybody could have known that vote before it happened. Now, the only thing I've heard, which I think should be rather secure and known, is that 2 weeks, about 10 days, almost 2 weeks before the election, it would have been 2 weeks before that, the DPP held a huge rally down in Kaohsiung. And the power of that rally, to many people, convinced them that Lian was going to lose. And the KMT began selling off its property 2 weeks before the election. That is, 2 weeks ahead of time, they pretty much knew that Lian was going to lose. Now, I don't believe in the least that Li Denghui, even though he was president, would have known or been able to control the polling to just,
control that 2.6% gap.
Oh no, I'm not saying rigging the vote. I'm not implying.
No,
that.
I'm not
Oh.
rigging the vote. Yeah, but it's kind of an ex post facto thing to think that it's really ex post facto, as we see a lot of the KMT thinking on this thing is really ex post facto, thinking that, well, Li Denghui was able to manipulate that so well that Song didn't win. And I really don't believe that.
Oh, no, I don't think the interpretation is that that prevented Song from winning. It was more that the fact that he did it, like that. Well, because I have seen the TVBS, at least the TVBS poll from 2000, because the poll director saved it because he's very proud of it. Which 6 months before the election, they said Chen 39, Song 37%,
Yeah.
and Lian 22%.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So he.
It was almost what the results actually were. It was close.
So he basically uses that as evidence that TVBS polls are very accurate. So basically,
But that showed Song winning over Chen.
no. So Chen 39,
Oh, it showed Chen at 39.
Chen 39, Song 37, Lian 22.
And that was TVBS, okay.
TVBS 6 months before the election.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
So when I'm referring to the actual polls, I'm referring to a poll that said Chen would win.
Yeah.
The saying, what I've heard is that poll was released to the DPP saying that Chen would win, and that a false poll saying Lian, who was actually well in behind in third place, would win to trick KMT voters and Blue supporters into voting for Lian instead of Song.
I don't believe any of that. I wouldn't believe that. I mean, I'm not saying that there were not such polls. There were lots and lots of polls, and who would choose, and you couldn't keep any particular results of polls secret. Mostly whatever camp thought any camp would try to release figures showing that it was winning. Of course, the KMT would release figures showing that Lian is ahead and it's going to win. So I don't think there's any way that anybody could have known that information 6 months in advance. I don't think the voters.
No, I meant like in the last few days before the election, they said that Li Denghui.
TVBS said this a few days before.
No, this has nothing to do. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm confusing you. I'm sorry.
Well, this thought that perhaps Li Denghui manipulated the election in the last few days by releasing one kind of poll versus another kind of poll. And I mean, I'd really have to hear him say this myself or write it to believe that he actually did that or that he was actually able to manipulate. If you would think that, well, he was trying to prevent too many votes from going to Song. Yeah, I suppose. I mean, obviously Song was the main enemy there. But if you would think that he would want people to vote for Chen rather than Song, I don't think that was definitely something that he could manipulate in that way in the last few days of the election. So to me that fits into another kind of conspiracy theory that's grasping at straws. You could say that Song himself, by so willingly splitting the KMT, is the main culprit here, and I don't know why nobody pointed to Song as being the main culprit for obviously splitting the KMT virtually down the middle. And that's the real cause for the Chen Shui-bian being able to take the election with 39% of the vote. If you want to accept that kind of conspiracy theory, then you must be rooting for Chinese nationalism to win in the end. But I think we've seen very clearly that the trend in Taiwan over a long period of time, it's not like there's any one big change or any one big moment that that defines this trend. It's a long-term trend. I mean, the DPP position has only been gaining 2 or 3% a year over a long time trend. It kind of goes up and down, including Chen Shui-bian getting 39.3% in the year 2000, and then Li Denghui and his group getting, say, 5-8% in the middle election, and then Chen Shui-bian just barely making 50.2% in the year 2004. I mean, it's a long-term trend.